Hi, I'm Zodwa Nyoni, and I'm a playwright, poet, film director, and now screenwriter. And I started writing, in like 2005, and that was with a group called Leeds Young Authors that were based like just across from here, across from Mandela Center, at Host Media Center, which is now called I think Leeds Media Center. And I think kind of back then I just was sort of fascinated in just telling stories, and sort of the thing that was kind of first introduced to me was poetry. And I think what was so wonderful about kind of learning about kind of slam poetry as part of Leeds Young Authors is that you were doing it with a group of other young people. And it was kind of poetry like outside of what we were kind of studying in school. And not only that, we're having like our kind of community leaders like coming in to kind of teach us work about, kind of poets that we weren't necessarily kind of coming across in like academia. So you had kind of Khadija Ibrahim and Paulette Morris running Leeds Young Authors, and they were bringing kind of guests from like locally. So you'd have like kind of Joe Williams or like David Hamilton coming in and talk about kind of like words and movement, or like you'd get like international poets like Gochi coming in, and you'd learn all this stuff about like the history of like performance and the history of kind of creativity, and specific about like kind of Black voices sort of at like the epicenter of these movements. And I think kind of being somebody who was like 16, 17 at that point, and hadn't really thought about what does a career in the arts look like. When we then started kind of getting these artists coming in and showing you what it could be and how you could like forge your own path, I think that's when I thought that's something that I want to do. And I then went on to kind of study. I wasn't actually studying anything kind of creative at that point. I was just had kind of done a lot of like reading. I love kind of poetry. I love English literature. So I was doing the reading, but I wasn't sort of kind of engaging like myself. So then kind of after A levels, I went in to study performing arts at Park Lane College. And I did a theatre studies degree as well after that. And I remember going I think this is it for me then. I think I love the idea of being able to kind of be in this space, kind of communicating with audiences. And taking like these big ideas, from kind of society, the society that we lived in, and finding kind of a vehicle and use kind of creativity as a vehicle to be able to kind of discuss all the things that were kind of like important in my life, particularly things around like race and migration and about kind of gender politics, and as we kind of gotten older, being able to kind of discuss more complex ideas around kind of politics as well, and feeling like as if like your voice has a platform to do that. And I don't think necessarily I would have had like that level of kind of growth if it hadn't been like for all the grassroots projects, specific kind of in Chapeltown, that like enabled me to sort of find my voice as a kind of creative. So I was working sort of with Leeds Young Authors for about kind of 5 or 6 years, kind of 2010 up until 2011. And from about kind of 2011, I went on to kind of take part actually in like my first like writing development program at Freedom Studios. And that was like my kind of introduction into like playwriting. And I did that course for about a few months actually, kind of 3 or 4 months or so. And that was like learning all the things about kind of character and structure and like narrative arc and like conflict is drama. And I wrote my first play on there. And the play was called The Pauvre Die Till Freedom Comes. And it was interesting kind of seeing like the process of kind of being a part of like a theatrical production, because then it went from, just being an idea in my head onto like the page, and then when you have a draft, you pass it on to like the director, and then the director kind of gets into the rehearsal room with actors, and then you see like the production team coming on board to sort of build like the set and the props, and like where does the movement kind of come into it. And I was like, I like this. I like being part of like this kind of collaborative team. So I sort of moved from being independent on my own, like writing and performing everything as a poet, to then kind of being this playwright who was now part of like this big kind of production team. And I loved kind of learning about like what is my role in the team, and how do I then kind of pass the work forward and trust in like the team's skill set and capability to kind of realize like the ideas of the play. From kind of Freedom Studios, I then went on to the West Yorkshire Playhouse, which is now called the Leeds Playhouse. And I did another kind of development program with them. And I wrote a short play called Shift, which is about kind of like night shift workers at this care home. And then I wrote like my first full-length play, which was Boy Boy is Dead. And that's kind of when everything just kind of changed and turned around. And I went from sort of being this new writer, just kind of discovering myself and still figuring out like what stories I wanted to tell, to Boy Boy's Dead winning the Channel 4 Playwrights game, and also being shortlisted for the Susan Smith Black Men Prize, which was an international prize, a women's prize. And suddenly it was like, oh, you're like a writer now, like writer properly. But even then, I think I was already a writer, but like it was the things that I think having to kind of address the things that we think define you as a writer has been interesting, because I was already doing that stuff long before. It's just that now a lot more people were starting to look at like the work that I was doing, and it was kind of getting like recognition, you know, kind of beyond like this country, which was kind of big for me, because having been somebody who kind of migrated to England and had kind of existed like on the periphery a lot of the time, and you know, you need like your residency in order for you to sort of feel like you're a part of this place. So then to kind of start kind of creating work that was kind of getting recognized like kind of beyond this country, but also kind of being recognized in a way that was kind of considered a part of this country was quite an interesting kind of place to be in, because sometimes you feel like you're kind of here and also kind of not here at the same time. But I sort of knew that along the way that my voice was really important, and I wanted to kind of keep having this kind of conversation with people. So regardless of what, for example, like the Home Office was kind of making me feel, you know, kind of really not wanted, you know, I was still going to create work that I thought was really important for like this society to like have conversations about. So one of the pieces that has kind of come out kind of through my time as like the writer in residence at the Leeds Playhouse was 9 Lives. And we're going to hear like an extract of 9 Lives. But like in writing that play, I was reading a lot around like the process of kind of claiming or kind of gaining a residency in this country, because like my family's kind of come through a different route. And I think that was like one of the important things like I wanted to understand for myself, but also like an audience to understand, is that the way that you sort of gain your residency in this country is so different, and there isn't just one route for everybody. And I started kind of reading a lot more about what does it mean to kind of claim asylum, because asylum is very different from like residence, or you know, getting like a student scholarship or a student visa, for example, or like refugee status. Those are all really different processes. So in doing a lot of like my reading, I kind of came across different kind of websites that kind of talked about like the different meanings of things, but also like had like testimonials from people who had kind of gone through the different immigration processes. And that's kind of where like the character in 9 Lives was born, Ishmael.
Some of us were running. Some of us were fleeing. Some of us know wars that will never cease. Some of us were stripped and beaten. Some of us have scars that will never heal. Some of us were thrown into prisons. Some of us were sent back. Some of us were alone. Some of us felt invisible. Some of us felt time slow in our wait.
And Ishmael's kind of story is about claiming asylum kind of based on like kind of his sexual orientation and kind of being persecuted for that in Zimbabwe, where it's still illegal to be gay. And looking at like what was like the journey for those asylum seekers who were having to kind of flee kind of their country of origin, trying to kind of claim asylum in England, but also kind of facing like hostility in England.
Burnstow Heights, flat 46, 12 floors up, third door on the left. Temporary accommodation, not home. This is section 95, not leave to remain. This is where you will wait. This is all that you get. There is a stranger in my house, so I think that I am a stranger in his house. He tells me not to touch his things, and then never speaks to me again after that. This conveyor belt of a system moves us from place to place. You never know who you will find here. You never know who you will get in these concrete cocoons where we live in limbo. We would be perfect metaphors for change if we didn't emerge so scarred. Something happens to us in our metamorphosis. We shed the past to acquire new inflictions. Oh, it is traumatic to be an immigrant.
So with Ishmael, he is also fleeing not only kind of for his safety, but also like he's heard that potentially his lover from Zimbabwe has also kind of fled to England, and his lover is called David. So part of kind of him kind of gaining a place of sanctuary for himself, he also was trying to find like whether or not he can reconnect like with his lover David. But because they're sort of both ending up in this space where like they've lost so much, there's like this kind of disconnection between him and David, and they both try to find home again, but maybe not necessarily kind of find home within each other again, which I think is like the kind of biggest sadness for Ishmael in the play, is that, you know, the people that he loves is also home. So he has to try and figure out in the play, how does he kind of build that sense of kind of home again within himself, but also like within the community that he lives in. And in the play, when he arrives, he kind of tells us in like the first scene what it's like kind of fleeing, but also kind of arriving and having to kind of deal with like kind of border security and like the questions that you kind of get asked when you claim asylum, and like how intrusive that kind of process can be. And then he kind of gets dispersed out to Armley in Leeds. And it's interesting kind of thinking about writing kind of certain kind of communities. The way that kind of we discover Armley in the play with Ishmael, I also had to kind of discover Armley because I predominantly grew up in Chapeltown. So I then had to kind of go out into like Armley and do a walk around and meet people and go find out where's the cafe, where's the pub, you know, who kind of makes up certain communities, and what is the idea of kind of community, and how do I kind of see that through the eyes of somebody who's never been here before. And I'm hoping that kind of you get that sense in like in the second scene, where you finally kind of get Ishmael kind of going out after having been in his flat, like isolated for like a month, and he finally kind of gets to go out and meet the people of Armley, and eventually kind of he meets more people from Leeds.
By the end of the first week, the walls have started closing in. During the day, I worry that the nightmares will come true, and I fear sleeping in case the laws will change overnight and this country will just vomit me out. They don't tell you how long the wait will last. The hands of the clock have gone limp from my avoidance. There's no use in keeping time. I start taking walks. Malt's pub. Full pint glasses at 11 a.m., eh? Laughing. Oh, St. Bartholomew's. Stained glass windows. The pink tracksuit, black tracksuit. Young girls on phones, babies on hips, pacifiers in mouths. Mike's carpets boarded up. Fridges dumped in streets, pit bulls on leashes, grandmothers with little brooches pinned to their coats, music blaring from car speakers, fish and chip shops, charity shops, betting shops, turkey shops, Russian shops, tower blocks, back-to-backs, and British Heart Foundation, Cancer Research, St. George's Crypt, Town Street. Barbara Taylor Bradford, written in stone. Alan Bennett, written in stone. Stanley Road, number 16. Prison walls, Gregs, bodybuilders, 2-for-1s, mosques. I want to learn everything. I want to remember it. I want it to remember me. I want it to climb inside me and to build a home. I don't want to feel distant and strange in this place. I don't want the nightmares of the past. I've started checking Facebook. I give up bread and milk and save enough for 2 hours on the computer in Cath's cafe. Cath is married to Brian, but Brian always stays in the kitchen though. I've never seen his face. All I've ever seen is a forearm with a white flag and a red cross passing plates of full English breakfasts. As each plate comes through, Cath is forced to peel herself away from the weekly Take a Break magazine that is spread open on the counter. I sit in the corner, every Thursday, and for the few hours that I am there, their marriage unfolds for us to hear. Right? Right! Are you listening? Right. Listen to this. Grandma falls in love with long-lost grandson. Oh, hey, right, I met that American. I bet they're American. Yes, love, they could only be American. They go back and forth, arguing about who guessed it first. Hey, what are you doing falling in love with grandson? That Jeremy Kyle's low, but even that to be too sick for him. It's got to be a limit, even for bottom feeders. He tells her to stop being so judgmental. They start back up arguing again. Cath's Cafe has been open for 20 years. Huh. I scroll down David's page, checking for updates. His last post was an interview he did with Star FM. It's the last time I heard his voice before all the trouble began. Bamida posts telling him never to come back. A disgusting import from the colonial days, un-African, ungodly. I send him messages. I write him many messages asking him if he is okay. Look, if you don't want to do it here, then just call me. Are you in England? Please. He hasn't replied. He hasn't read any of my messages. The fear didn't give me time to plan. I ran out of Harare, I ran out of Zimbabwe, I ran out of South Africa. I arrived at Heathrow with what little I had. They said it wasn't enough. They asked me to prove that I am gay. They asked me, what does a penis feel like? Why do I like it? I need to tell them that we weren't dirty. I need to tell them that we were so much more. I need David. I need David. I checked my page last. Still after 2 months, I haven't contacted anyone. I don't know what to say to them. My friends, Muzi and DJ, they post every day. Hey, where are you, bro? Why didn't you tell us? They were my boys. From this high. We never thought we would exist past the good times, you know? We were the blood brothers, the three musketeers riding together for life, the boys that all the ladies loved. I wanted to tell them. At 16, I knew for sure. But I was worried that they would look at me differently. At 17, I was worried that they wouldn't see a man. At 21, I was worried what drunk mouths would say. I spent years practicing what I would even say to my father. Papa, look, I think that maybe he would understand. Or maybe I would die right there on the spot. No, not his only son. Not the one who's supposed to carry his name. Not in this family. Not in this house. I thought about telling my mother. Then maybe she would die right there on the spot. Then be resurrected up and drag me to the church to receive a healing. Oh Lord, cleanse him, heal him, save him, Lord. They needed a good son. I tried to be a good son for as long as I could.
One of the things that we kind of get to later on in the play is that actually in the flat that he's been sent to live in, he lives with a guy who is an Iranian refugee, and they don't have a shared language, but they know what it means to be kind of isolated, like in this space together. But mainly the kind of drive of the piece is for us to kind of learn what it means kind of for Ishmael to kind of find his own place, but we just kind of get different stories of other people that he kind of comes across like in the play. And I think what's been kind of interesting in seeing how like the life of the play, because the play came out in 2014 as part of a scheme called A Play, a Pie and a Pint for Moore in Glasgow and the West Yorkshire Playhouse, Leeds Playhouse, is that, you know, I thought that it was going to be the small play that I did as part of my residency. But then it's kind of gone on to have like this bigger impact where we're able to kind of take the play to the House of Parliament. You know, we're able to kind of use it as part of a gala for UK kind of LGIG, and also kind of fundraising gala for them. And this was like, you know, we began in 2014, and we had like the fundraising gala in 2016, and then it kind of went on to kind of have this revival again at the Bridge Theatre in 2020. And then since then, it's kind of gone on to be shown in America, and then it's going on in the summer in South Africa. And I think sometimes, like when you write these plays, you never know where it's going to end up. But I think this one has been sort of this like beautiful little gem that kind of continues to like have connections kind of beyond what I imagined it could ever do. And it's kind of getting like republished again. And for me, it feels like, you know, with writing, you never know genuinely who it's going to connect to. But that becomes like the beauty of like the process, because every audience member that kind of comes to the work is like, you know, 100 possibilities of where the work could go, or like how we could like change somebody or kind of make a shift in society. If it was just going to make an impact like just locally and like in Leeds, for me that was like big. For it to have gone on to like made an impact like nationally and then internationally is like well beyond what I thought it would be, but also like incredibly grateful for like that process. And I think I never would have thought like the work would have kind of ended up where it's at when I began at 16, 17, writing poems, you know, at Host Media Centre with Leeds Young Authors. But I've had to kind of like shape this kind of career that I wanted, but also like learn how to be incredibly like brave and scared at the same time, and like go out into the world and know that like the voice mattered. But I was so grateful that I had like this kind of grounding quite early on that like allowed me to sort of believe like in my own voice. So like now when I work with like new writers, either like in universities where I lecture or like at theatres, it's like having to kind of say to them that, you know, you're never going to avoid the fear bit. Like it's just always going to be there. But it's like what you really appreciate is like the vulnerability of like that process, and like when you get to the other side and you're able to kind of share the work, that's the thing you're kind of doing, and that's the space in which kind of you learn. So when you can find the ability to like push through that, and you don't always have to do that by yourself, you can do it like by building community as well. And you'll always have to kind of build communities like in the different stages and spaces that you're in. But it's important to kind of keep doing that, because the work in itself is like this beautiful reward that we get, and it kind of makes like the whole process really worth it. When I think a lot about like how like the environment like kind of impacts who I am like as a writer and like as a person, like it's so crucial to like my making, because like my varied experiences inform like the work that I make. So I will always bring who I am. You know, like be, you know, Black, child, immigrant, because I'm first generation immigrant, African. Like I will bring that to these environments, right? And coming to this country, and also knowing that there's like kind of the history of like kind of colonialization, and colonialism. You know, within kind of Zimbabwe, you always kind of carry that idea of like what you think England is. then you sort of marry like kind of two cultures together, or you try kind of marry two cultures together, or they clash. And even that kind of that clash or that marrying kind of creates kind of experiences. So all of that sort of shaped who I was. And I think I was so lucky that I had, within the spaces and times when I kind of had confusion, I had leading authors to kind of go to, because you were in like this environment of Black creatives who were able to kind of usher you through like this rite of passage of kind of growing up, and specifically kind of being an immigrant. You sort of needed to understand like, what is this environment that I'm in, and how do I make sense in this space, and how do I find purpose in this space in a country that is constantly, like what Ishmael says in the play, like trying to vomit me out. So when you have people who are able to kind of hold space for you, you then are able to figure out like, what do I do either with like the frustration or the anger or the loneliness or the displacement. You're able to kind of learn how to use it to kind of create the work that you make. I'm very much kind of shaped by like who I am in my identity, but also like in my experiences. So a lot of my work, I'd say, is certainly about Black communities. It centers Black women in particular. And is about kind of their experiences, and it's kind of across different cultures, because there isn't like a monolith in terms of kind of Black experiences. So what somebody experiences as like kind of Black African immigrant may not necessarily be the same that kind of as a Black Caribbean immigrant experiences. But I kind of take the time to kind of learn and study that, because I think having our stories kind of platformed is very, very important for the next generation to know that actually you have space here too. You may not necessarily kind of feel like sometimes you have the agency or you are seen, but you are. And I think if I can at least kind of offer that to like one new writer or one young person, then I guess I'm passing on what was given to me. So currently, I would sort of describe myself as a playwright, film director, and screenwriter. And I can't say that looking back at like my 16, 17-year-old self, I would be like having all like these things attached to my name, because at first it was just like, it's just poetry, isn't it? Like you're just beginning and you're just writing kind of the odd poem here and there. And then I had to kind of, along the way, sort of learn a lot more about the business of the industry of the arts, and learn about what does it take for you to kind of build a creative career. Because as much as it is about like your creativity, actually, there's a lot that you have to learn about the industry in itself. And how, for example, like how do you get commissioned? You know, what do contracts look like? What's the difference between like a contract that is like a page versus one that starts to become like 50 pages because they've been there? And like trying to understand like all of like that legal kind of jargon, and what does it mean when you are kind of tied to a contract? All of that stuff is kind of important for you to learn, like learning how to like be disciplined and like manage your own time, because you don't have the same structures as you would do, let's say if you were in an organization and working 9 to 5. So much about yourself, of like your kind of creativity, is like managed by who you are. When I first began like as a poet, a lot of it was kind of supported by like the community, and a lot of like the work that was kind of being offered and experiences that were being offered were kind of through leading authors. And then sort of having to kind of take that leap, actually, like after, because I probably joined about 2005, 2010, 11, I was sort of starting to make the decision that I wanted to kind of explore other things that weren't necessarily kind of within leading authors, and weren't necessarily about like doing group work. And I was interested in like kind of carving out like my own kind of creative career independently. So even just kind of taking the opportunity to like, something kind of gets sent to you, or something kind of gets mentioned to you, and you have to apply for that thing. And you have to think about when's the deadline, and like what does my application kind of look like, and how do I kind of talk about myself and talk about my work. I had to start doing all of that stuff on my own. So even applied to be a part of like Street Voices 3. So I now teach Street Voices, by the way, for Freedom Studios. So I just finished teaching Street Voices 8. So when I applied for Street Voices 3 in 2010, I had to do the whole application form. I had to talk about what it is I was interested in. I had to talk about like what I wanted like from the arts, what I wanted like from the scheme. That's kind of a skill set that you have to learn, because you're going to end up doing loads of different like application forms. You're going to have to talk about you work in so many kind of different spaces. When I then kind of went into film, I remember one of the first things that I did was like be like in this group kind of industry kind of meeting with like TV execs and like film execs, and like they always talk about like how you have to kind of pitch your ideas and kind of pitch who you are, and it has to be like this elevated pitch, and you kind of say like the best things of yourself. So even like the times when you feel like I'm not anything. Like the imposter syndrome kind of kicks in, and you don't think that you're somebody special. You got to dig it from somewhere, because there's a lot of other people doing exactly the same thing, where we're kind of questioning ourselves as kind of creatives. But the frustrating, but also like maybe equally like beneficial thing about in the industry is that you also have to learn how to also just talk about who you are, and like kind of stand like in that confidence, and like dig that bravery out from somewhere, and like walk into this meeting. Like, so for example, when I kind of got the funding to make my first short film, The Ancestors, I remember kind of going to these meetings for like BBC and like Channel 4 with these kind of execs, and I was telling them that I'm going to be a director. I was going to direct this film. I'd never directed a single thing in my life. I knew nothing about directing, and I knew like I googled like some of like the jargon stuff. So like, and I had like this my producer with me, Barrington Paul Robinson, and I went to this meeting that they'd ask him about like my creative vision. I'm like, yeah, like it's gonna be this aesthetic and this, and I was like, as long as I sell it for the next like half an hour, I'm good. And that's exactly what I did. And luckily, I kind of had like Barrington as like this buffer. But we went in like meeting after meeting trying to get this funding, and eventually we got the funding from BBC to kind of make the short film. And then we got kind of match funding from like the BFI. And it's like, it's really scary, because like you go in thinking that being in these kind of spaces is so far away from you. And sometimes it feels like it is, specifically if it's about like your gender or like your race, it can always feel like a step away from something that's kind of attainable to your dreams. But when you do it like once, and you go, oh wow, okay, I smashed that. And you go, okay, I can do it again. So now I've kind of end up like in certain meetings where we're talking about, so for example, I had to go for this interview about being a writer for a Netflix show and writing a spin-off series for it. And I remember thinking, like, I'd watched the show because it's like on season 3 on Netflix right now, season 4. But going into that thinking, okay, there's like a massive following for this show. And I'm going to go in, little old me who like grew up in Chinatown, has to go in and talk about this show that's sort of big in America. It's got all these American like execs and American producers. Like the only British people in like this project were like the 4 writers, and that was it. And I had to go in and talk about like the show, which I maybe like watched, like binge watched before the meeting, and like the vision that I had for this character. And I'm like, I'm talking about this vision for this character, knowing there's like this massive cult following who like, if they don't like it, like they can like cancel you on Twitter. But one thing I'm certainly sure of is like my ability to write. Like that's the only thing I can trust in. I cannot like speak to what, you know, X amount of million people want from one show on Netflix. I can't. But what I know I'm great at doing is like character development. So above all else, when like imposter syndrome and fear kicks in, I can just trust in like my skill set. I can trust in my ability to like write a script, to deliver on time, and to make myself open to be part of a collaborative team, because we have to make this thing together. And like these are kind of the lessons that you kind of start to learn like along the way. And I think what's been really important for me is to be able to push myself kind of beyond my own boundaries. So going into film was really scary. Going into television has been really scary. Going into theatre has been really, really scary. But like I think theatre has been like my biggest like grounding and lessons over the last 15 years. But I'm glad that I did it. I think in the moment, like if I look back at like each moment I made that transition, I probably would have like wanted to run away. But so much more comes out on the other side of like the vulnerability and when you confront the fear.